Trevor, thank you for that very full and interesting and detailed analysis of the situation. I will again begin with a brief question, and then we'll go to Ernie again briefly before the audience can have a chance to respond. When we're talking about getting to a new disarmament body, which is obviously, an extremely important question, with the way in which the United Nations works, this huge 192 country body, it always works through pressure. And if countries are going to join an organization that actually has teeth, as opposed to one that will just sit there and talk, there will have to be pressure from neighbors of countries who don't want to join and from larger countries that have other ways of putting on pressure. But given the reconfiguration that the world has gone through over even the last year, how practical is it that this kind of pressure could be applied?
I think what's most likely to happen is you would get a package deal where the major countries would agree that this was going to happen, and the rest of us would really go along with it. You can imagine China, the US, Russia, all the existing nuclear weapon states, India, Pakistan, Israel, that's a huge list, would have to agree that, yes, they were going to disarm, the process is thus, and you would be setting up an international body at the same time. So it's not really a question of whether we start these steps, then, oh, by the way, we need an organization. It would have to be an entire package deal. So the pressure would really be to agree that package deal. But just on the institutions, UN bodies are tricky things. Occasionally they do things that they haven't necessarily been mandated to, but they do it by stealth. The IAEA does several things which, if they probably put them to the General Conference and said, could we have a vote on this, it wouldn't get through. But UN organizations can be very crafty about expanding their mandate without specifically being asked to. And the IAEA could very well be the kernel of that body. And as the process of negotiating this final package was proceeding, it could actually be working on the measures to be put in place. And the agency can really be asked to do anything. It can be asked by states collectively to verify a nuclear weapon-free world. That's possible under its statute. It just has to be asked. So we have the rudiments of that there. So the pressure would be, in that case, to enhance the powers of the existing organization.
Thank you. And now, if Ernie has a question, we'll go on.
Well, maybe I will, just a brief one. You made the very sensible point about an inspection regime having to be somewhat discriminating. I mean, focus on those on the likely proliferators rather than the unlikely ones, which is eminently sensible. But I'm wondering if you've given any sort of thought to the political problems that presents. I mean, there's this sort of strong sense of commitment to non-discriminatory regime that treats everyone equally, and the kind of implications, political implications of singling out perceived. Presumably there's some kind of a triggering mechanisms or something that would lead you to concentrate more on one country than another.
Yes, I think there'd be two ways to approach this. One would be, as part of the deal, you just make it very explicit and say, well, you are the nuclear weapon states or the potential nuclear weapon states. You have caused this problem. You're actually going to have to be more closely verified than the rest of us. That would be like the NPT deal in a way, and that would be explicit and it would have to be agreed. The other way to do it is partly by what I suggested, stealth almost, not rubbing it in the face of any of the countries that would be receiving more verification, but setting up processes and structures so that is in effect what happens. And I can give you an example of that. The International Atomic Energy Agency already have something called integrated safeguards. And it means if you have a lot of safeguards over the years applied to your nuclear industry, like Canada, and you're getting a bit tired with this, there are just so many inspections, so many layers, you can actually ask the agency to come and look at the entire inspection regime imposed on you and essentially to rationalize it, reorganize it, so you don't have such a burden And that's in return, in reward, if you like, for being a good complier, being in compliance, having a great track record, signing all the agreements, doing what you're supposed to do. And the implicit reward is we're going to simplify and remove some of the burden on you because of your good record. Now, they don't actually say that, but that's in effect what happens. The agency saves money as well because they don't have to use so many person hours on each nuclear plant in each country. But that's in effect what happens. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, in my view.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the audience. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions on this. Yes, this gentleman.
My name is Bill Baneja from the Canadian Department of Peace Initiative. You presented a very interesting framework, the Nuclear Disarmament Treaty and Nuclear Disarmament Organization. I was wondering, why would a country like Canada, why would we not go for something like that? And what stops us from doing that? I would like to have your views on that.
I think Canada would go for a deal like this, but the deal doesn't exist yet. And Canada, like every other country, would want to see the details and would want to see how that regime would treat Canada. But I presume Canada would have no problem with this. In fact, I think the opposite. Canada should see this as an amazing opportunity and take an initiative in looking forward to build this regime in a way that it currently, unfortunately, doesn't.
Okay. Next. Yes, this lady here.
Excuse me, I'm Adele Buckley from Canadian Pugwash, and that was really interesting and enlightening. My question is about money. It seems to me that we already have heard how the IAEA is underfunded, and how about this new institution, or IAEA enlarged, which would also have similar difficulties. Now, it's perfectly clear that there would be savings with the reducing nuclear weapons. There ought to be lots of money around to work on this, but would there be?
Well, the economic study we did, and we were just, in a sense, pulling figures out of the air because we don't exactly know the details, indicates it's cheap. It's incredibly cheap compared to what states currently spend on their nuclear arsenal. So from a global point of view, it's cheap. Already the agency is cheap. Its budget is reputed to be the same as the New York City Police Department. I don't know if that's still true. But when you think about the security value we get from that agency, it's a security bargain. So my view would be that money shouldn't have any role in this. We're talking about a pittance compared to the benefits to the entire world. So our aim in doing the study, and hopefully we can refine this much further, is to prove that this is not an obstacle and should not be an obstacle. And those countries who try and raise this as some great unknown are actually using this as an excuse not to proceed. So in other words, we shouldn't let Japan and other countries get away with this idea that somehow this is all too expensive.
Okay. Next question. I'll take one from over this side. It should be on.
Okay, it's on. My question is, to what extent has this idea been tested out or run through the United States? And what I'm asking is whether or not the United States would be prepared to accept IAEA intrusive evaluation or examination of its entire nuclear apparatus.
Well, as part of the package, they would have to. The whole enterprise could not proceed without them. In fact, the United States would probably, knowing the way the Americans do things, take the lead in designing the system. To their credit, they give a lot of assistance to the IAEA unknown. They provide technologies, they provide experts and advice. They already support bountifully the IAEA system. Even under the Bush administration, they still supported the technical workings of the agency. So once you have the Americans on board, they're going to bring the full strength of their R&D effort and their former weapons labs, you can imagine, to this. But it has to be agreed first. It has to be part of the package. You could not envisage a nuclear weapon-free world without the United States accepting intrusive inspections. They already do that in the chemical weapons case, as does China, as do all the parties to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Unprecedented intrusive inspections, not just of their former weapons facilities, but also of industry, the chemical industry. So that's the model, but it would have to be an essential part of the regime for the United States to agree to this. So this is not optional. And as I say, everything would have to come together in this package. It could be implemented step by step, but it's absolutely vital that the nuclear weapon states open themselves up to these intrusive inspections. Otherwise, we don't get anywhere. But I think it's possible. I never thought I'd see the day when China opened itself up to on-site inspections of its chemical industry, of all things, but it does.
Okay, and next question, I believe was you, because you were actually first and you disappeared in the crowd. Yes, Pierre?
Pierre Jasmin. The question is about Iran. Of course, it's surrounded north, Russia, east, China, south, India and Pakistan, Israel, west, and United States Navy and Air Force everywhere in Georgia, Detroit of Hormuz, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. What could these countries do to, instead of threatening Iran, of offering it some counterpart measures? Is that idealistic to think that they could deal with Iran in those terms, more positive terms?
Well, that's more a current strategic political issue. I mean, nuclear weapon-free world, you're looking at a couple of decades away, I would think. So those sorts of questions would obviously have to be dealt with in some way beforehand. But in relation to the nuclear weapon-free world, as I suggested, what you might want is a special Middle East verification and monitoring system. I can't imagine Israel giving up the bomb without very intrusive access to Syria and Iran, and you can imagine. So to solve those really difficult regional problems, we probably need a regional arrangement where you have even more intrusive verification. I mean, I can't imagine Australia and New Zealand going down this route, but I can imagine India and Pakistan, the two Koreas, the Middle East. That's the obvious place to have this arrangement. I don't say it'll happen, but it will be a very good thing to recommend, and I think countries like Pakistan and Israel would insist if they're going to do this, as Brazil and Argentina agreed they needed when they both decided to give up their nuclear weapon ambitions. They have a bilateral agency which they both fund and they both participate with, and it verifies that neither of them are diverting their activities to nuclear weapons purposes. In addition, they also are inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So you have a regional layer or bilateral layer, and then you have a multilateral layer. So to me, that's a very good model.
Good. I think we'll...
Peter Meinke from Pugwash, Canada. What do you do about the non-state actors such as Al-Qaeda?
Yeah, I thought someone would ask me about that. I think, well, for a start, what you do is you ensure that states fulfill their obligations regarding their own territory. And currently that is not the case. We have many states which don't have the proper national implementation measures within their own territory to deal with non-state actors. Ever since the passage of Resolution 1540 by the Security Council, the UN Security Council, all countries are legally obliged by the Council to put these measures in place. So things like, it's like proper legislation, proper measures, better customs, better intelligence. It's obviously a never-ending fight against terrorism. So certainly you want to have those measures in place. The other thing you want to do is to ensure that no fissionable material falls into the hands of terrorists. That's the most difficult thing in terms of bomb making, to make sure they don't get hold of high-enriched uranium and plutonium. As I suggest, under a nuclear weapon-free world, those materials should not exist. Now, that doesn't mean there's still not a problem of smuggling and illicit production, but that would be a huge step forward. At the moment, there are so many tons of this material around the world in more or less guarded states. Security is better at some places than others. And so what you want to do is claw back that material from dangerous places, which the United States and Russia are doing. They're taking back highly enriched uranium from research reactors sitting in the middle of cities like Prague, etc. and bringing it back to the point of origin and adding it to their stockpile. Presumably, eventually, they'll destroy it. But that's exactly what you want to do. You want to remove that temptation to acquire steel material on the part of terrorists. And a nuclear weapon-free world, to my mind, would achieve that by banning the use of these materials for any purpose, peaceful or weapons.
And the gentleman at the back there. No, you.
Gordon Edwards, Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. That's exactly the point that I wanted to raise. With regard to the so-called nuclear renaissance, which is currently being promoted in terms of expanding nuclear facilities, one of the things that we hear more and more is the idea of recycling the used fuel in order to stretch the nuclear fuel supplies. This, of course, would add greatly to the stockpile of plutonium that would be available for diversion. And of course, the difficulty is that plutonium, once separated, it can be smuggled across borders relatively easily, and therefore you could have nuclear weapons activities taking place in places which are quite remote from the place of origin. And I'm wondering, how important is it in preparing for a world of zero nuclear weapons to speak out against allowing the reprocessing of spent fuel as a routine thing, because it's going to so greatly complicate the future in terms of maintaining a world free of nuclear weapons?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked, because we're currently doing a study, as I think was mentioned, on the future of nuclear energy and these sorts of implications. I think reprocessing should be banned, essentially, for the reasons you say. It's a weapons material. If you have it sitting around, you can craft it into a weapon. It's dangerous to handle. It's expensive to produce. Reprocessing is very expensive. The plants themselves aren't exactly safe. It would be better for all of us if the plutonium was left in spent fuel and buried in the ground, essentially. We can't do much about the material that already exists. It is there. Somehow we have to remove it from the weapons scene, essentially. Mohammed al-Baradei, the outgoing Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has proposed that we multilateralize that part of the fuel cycle. So any enrichment activities, any reprocessing would be done under international auspices, verified by the IAEA. But I personally think we should end all reprocessing altogether. The United States, as you know, since the Carter administration had that policy, they were attempting to discourage reprocessing worldwide. They stopped doing it themselves, which is incredibly admirable, but it didn't work. Other countries kept doing it, Japan and France, etc. To my mind, it is not the way that nuclear energy should go. In our report, we will be recommending the once-through fuel cycle. If you're going to have nuclear energy, you want to put the material through, then get rid of the waste, not reprocessing. So it's a very important issue. And I think it's one thing where the answers are clear. Those who say that this is a valuable material, we should be extracting it and using it in breeder reactors or fast breeder reactors as a part of the plutonium economy, I think are fooling themselves. Those reactors work very poorly. They're dangerous. Every country that's tried to set one up has shut it down. The French are shutting down their fast breeder reactors. So that whole industry, I think, is ill-advised and dangerous.
Right. Well, I think unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time here. And I'd like to thank everybody, the audience and our panelists who've come out today. And I hope you'll be able to stay around for our afternoon panels. Thanks very much.